Part of understanding what Gnostic sources actually do is to reacquire their purchase on cosmology. And that, I think, is now occurring in the discussion of what Gnostic authors meant to say. But the other way in which I refer to a new Gnosticism is a direct contradiction of a classic Gnostic postulate, namely the notion that matter inherently should be seen as being corrupt and often evil. And we can see this, I think, on page 2 in my quotation from David's work From God and Good, where the angels want to go another way at the moment of creation. Do not create, admonish the angel of light. There will be too much suffering. And so on through the litany of angels. This is an interesting reversal of the Gnostic cosmology. In the Gnostic cosmology, the source is portrayed as having pure consciousness, and the angels become defective. And so we have the result of Pistis Sophia devolving into matter. But in this picture that David gives us, David suggests that matter should no longer, as in the Platonist assumption, be regarded as inherently febrile or evil. Instead, matter itself becomes a form of risk, which the source takes despite the advice of the angels. This leads to another interesting difference that one can see in the new Gnosticism as compared to the old when one looks at the application of the same metaphor. And this you will see on page 4 of the handout when I look at the way in which the metaphor of the fisherman is used. David suggests we look at the fisherman as reeling in the line ever since that initial moment of creation, contravening the advice of the archangels. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year, century after century, and on and on. It was not easy reeling in an entire cosmos, even if you were the eternal metaphysical cosmic fisherman. Gospel according to Thomas from Nag Hammadi looks at the work of fishing in a different way. Son of Man is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea and drew it up from the sea full of little fish. Among them, the fisherman found a fine, large fish. He threw all the little fish back into the sea and easily chose the large fish. He's only looking for certain resonances with his own identity. All others can be dispensed with. This is an example of what it means, it seems to me, to step away from the view of matter being inherently inferior and to considering the possibility that matter is actually an instrument of consciousness rather than inherently antipathetic to it. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank especially our presenters for coming today. Many of you have come from far afield. It's our business, insofar as there is business this evening, to see to it that we all get settled. I'm happy to take questions, objections, and the rest now, or to wait for that to unfurl during the next few days. I hope that the program is set up so as to allow for there to be a free exchange whenever any of us feels that's appropriate. And that's about what I have to say this evening. Gary, have I omitted something?
No.
Gary is my co-chair, and so he...
It's a delight to have you all with us. Now, are you taking questions now, Bruce, or shall we?
Do you feel like it, Gary? I think that we have dinner for the presenters at 7. I think that was our agreement, right? So that means that we'd have time now to discuss, or, you know, and how we want to discuss is a matter for us to establish as ethos.
Maybe over a glass of wine.
That's another
In a
way.
more informal way.
Yeah. Yes, please, Larry.
I'm willing to make some comments. I was just waiting to
Good.
see that it's not like a class where
No.
you know, the bell rang and everybody's
Everyone leaves, right?
But if we're not eating till 7.
Exactly. There's time.
Yeah,
That was the
I
idea.
found this very interesting, a good example of why it's worth coming to learn things you don't know as opposed to going to conferences where you see the same thing you always do. Because I would not have come at this from the Gnosticism point of view. I would have come at it from the point of view of Kabbalah, which David and I have discussed many times. But of course, Gnosticism is essentially the root of Kabbalah, because much of Kabbalah is what you might call a kosher Gnosticism. It's not our subject today, but I was very happy, but of course I knew that I would hear this from some of your other work, you know, with the reasonable view of these Gnostic texts and not all this idiocy that we hear in the press. But we'll pass over that because I'm sure that's not really relevant today. But what I wanted to say is that I still noted down the fact that it seems to me that some of, when you read the paragraph, and let's make believe that David Warren's here, right? You can analyze someone's thought when they're not here. It's somewhat different than he can answer you, tell you, well, this is how I thought of it, not that way. But we'll leave that aside for that. We're just readers. So in the short outline which you gave, right? So it seems that maybe this is what you're trying to say, and I'm just saying it to myself better, not to anyone else because they understood you, that whereas in the Gnostic system, this situation of essentially emanation results in a negative result, in a failure, which is similar to the breaking of the vessels in Kabbalah. It results in David's system in a success. Okay? And this gets to something that I always ask myself about the Lurianic Kabbalah, which is, I guess, the best example of a later Jewish semi-Gnosticism mixed with Neoplatonism, et cetera, et cetera. And the question that I always couldn't figure out is, why would God set up a situation in which the vessels would break? Because as opposed to in your situation, in which it's an emanation who goofs up, okay, you can answer it's also an emanation in Kabbalah, because it's once you get to create the world, it's not the direct, okay. But still, it seems to me that what David is saying, what Kabbalah says, is that it is an intentional situation in a certain sense, that the story has to work out this way because we need this thing, which differs very differently from this mess of junky, moist, whatever it is, right? Which seems to be an unsuccessful pregnancy, as it said, or no, as the text there said, right? So that's the first comment that I have. The second comment I have is about this time thing, and I haven't really thought this out at all, really. But there's a big irony in a certain sense that I was mentioning in the discussion before that just the day before, 2 days ago, I had a whole long conversation with my wife about the Big Bang Theory. Because people quote the Big Bang Theory as the proof that really the basic essence of Genesis, of Creatio Nihil, was true. And of course, in the Big Bang Theory, it isn't exactly the same. And this time thing comes in there. But I think the notion of Genesis also is, never mind for a moment Augustine who says this, but I think the notion of Genesis is that there is, that what we call time is irrelevant until there's a creation. And that seems to be very clear, because first you got to stick up the bodies, the heavenly bodies, before you know what time is. So it seems to me that that is also right there in Genesis, and we'll call it the myth for a moment, right? Of Genesis, right? That meaning myth in the good sense, right? That there's no time beforehand. And it seems to me that the whole religious tradition has never been bothered by the thing that Hawkins says and all this kind of thing. Now, what do you mean? There couldn't be God because he couldn't exist as there is no time, because there is no time, so he couldn't have existed before creation. And somehow or another that doesn't seem to bother us because we assume that God is beyond time, and therefore you can't even measure it that way. So what are you talking about? So anyhow, there's a long set of comments, but I hope that it's helpful in some way, because it really got me thinking in a different direction, right, than, previously on this topic.
Thank you, Larry. Just to reply briefly, then I do want to come to Peter. On the issue of the Kabbalah, I agree with you that it is, on the whole, more accurate to say that Kabbalah is a version of Gnosticism than the reverse, especially Lurianic Kabbalah. On the other hand, I have to admit, I just want to say, as it were, by way of footnote, that I still have some regard for Robert Grant's suggestion. I think he was the first to make it. David Flusser made it as well, but I think Robert Grant was there first, that one possible root of Gnosticism was itself Merkabah mysticism, one of the roots of the Kabbalah. But that's a nicety. On the issue of time, what I find most fascinating about Augustine's approach is, first of all, that he is establishing that from the 5th century, you have a view of time which is completely unlike anything that has to do with the creationist debate of the moment.
Right.
As it happens next spring, I'm teaching a course on evolution with our professor of biology. And our purpose is to set side by side scientific and theological understandings in their time and to talk about their relationship. And I've been astounded at the way in which Augustine's understanding of simultaneity in creation has, in recent discussion, been entirely eclipsed. And you might understand that as being the result of ideology triumphing entirely over knowledge, or of there being an actual reconfiguration of the way in which Christians are approaching this text. Because I think that Augustine and Origen and Jerome, Jerome is actively speaking with rabbinic interlocutors when he interprets Genesis 1. I would tend to agree that the attempt of the interpreters is to construct a view of what it means to live without time at that moment. It may not resolve any questions in itself, but I think that is their attempt. Professor Atkins.
Sorry, I can say two things. I think there are two wonderful things about this particular meeting. One is that we're confronted with different approaches to seriously important questions. Another is the danger of oil meeting water. And let me expand on that just a moment. I think it was fascinating to listen to you talking about people's attitudes to a cultural presence, as it were. But it was no more than that. It was simply an exposition of how people thought in the past in response to the great intellects of the past. It seems to be the role of some of us here who are hard-nosed to various degrees on Moore's scale of hardness, to listen to your arguments, to say that on the whole we thought it was nonsense, and that it's our role to try to prize out what we see as the insights and elucidations and comprehensions that science can bring to the kind of problems that we concern us. I think, in a word, everything that has been said by you this evening, although fascinating at an intellectual level, has no relevance whatsoever to an understanding of the nature of the world. Philosophy, historical philosophy, and its obscurantist cousin, theology, really has confused matters. And I think what you have to do is to sit back and let the scientists tell you what the truth is, and try to let you incorporate that into your worldview. So, philosophy in the past has been a complete waste of time. and it's up to us, up to we, whichever the grammar is, scientists, to put you right. But maybe the pleasure of this meeting will be to put you on the right path to understanding in the future.